Live. Sean, how you doing today?
Dude, bro, I'm great, Michael. How are you?
Good. We're gonna have a fun conversation about hermetics and all things magic and spiritual, and I think it'll be a cool conversation.
Yes.
Where are
Yes.
you? Where are you based out of?
So I'm in Austin, Texas. Austin,
Uh,
Texas. Yeah. How about you? I
yeah,
have no idea. We just
I'm in
stumbled into
Fort Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah,
Okay. Nice.
yeah. I
Nice.
was going back and forth with your assistant,
Okay.
and
Very cool.
we got it in. Yeah, Austin's interesting. There's a lot of initiates over there as well too. It's a good center. It's interesting. I mean, when you say spiritual, and you dip in different communities, like they're all different, right? If you go California, Texas, Florida, New York, completely
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting how the landscape from a geo perspective, how they have, the energies that they carry are very much so tied to you study Steiner's work at all? Yeah. Kind of like he's got the Ahriman and Lucifer thing. And then in Aramon and Lucifer, you got these extensions of polarity, then you got this unification. It doesn't necessarily mean it's in the middle. It's just kind of like where things sit and what that density is doing from a vibratory perspective and how it shows up in real life. Like LA is very light, 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 right? It's just like go chase that shit. When I was out there, I was like a rocket with no rudder. I was just like I was taking off
Interesting.
when I lived there. Yeah. When I was in New York, I was really grounded because I had to be because the pace that things were moving at the
Yeah.
stillness of the vibration of the space you have to be like really agile. It's just a different environment. It's like,
Well, northern energy is more masculine, southern's feminine,
yeah,
right? So that's why you get more grounded, less. Were you in the city or were you in the state?
I was in the city. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, it's definitely it's go go go, very masculine energy, very
Yeah.
hard, very cold.
Yeah.
And then you get down south, and even further south, you go to like Brazil, South America, very feminine, right? Very flowy.
Oh, yeah.
So, what's your take on Austin, Texas, then?
I love it, dude. I love it. I mean, it's from my understanding, there's a lot of, it's like built on this, like aquifers underneath it. So there's like a flow of energy and water that's running underneath it.
Hmm.
And so what you sense and what you feel here it's a different, I've never felt anything quite like it. It doesn't feel like Texas. And that's why I'm assuming, they say keep Austin weird because it's weird.
Sixth,
It's
I walked down Sixth Street one time. Never again. That's a
yeah,
weird street.
it's an interesting street. I'm big into numbers, and if you look at each street as an aspect of dimensionality, it actually lines up with my take on how dimensions work. But that's a whole other thing. We don't have to go down. That's
Yeah,
a rabbit hole in itself.
that's a fun one. We can talk about, and that's good because I like having these conversations because it just makes kind of the woo woo kind of this high stuff people don't understand, like we were just talking about before, right? These conversations start shaping it so people can actually understand it and see how people are utilizing it.
Yeah, yeah,
So they
yeah.
can actually, once you have that clarity in the context, you can actually use it as a tool. And then what I like about that stuff, once you have tools and a clear plan, then you can have a repeatable process to manifest, right?
Hundred
Like,
percent.
up here we got the tree of life, we got Kabbalah. That's a blueprint to manifest, right?
Oh, 1,000
And
percent.
yeah, and a lot of people with the spiritual stuff, it's what I observe is most people aren't familiar that there's a spiritual path, like a step by step process. So they're going to these things seeking growth, seeking progression, but then they go, okay, I'm gonna go to a yoga event or an ice bath or this or that, and that's great, but that's tools in a bigger picture. You know, I always try to get people to understand what that bigger picture is, right? Ultimately, it's knowing ourselves, knowing our divinity, connecting further with God. That's a eternal journey, right? Which is cool
Oh,
because
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah. It's a deep, deep one.
how did you get into all this stuff? You said you don't know, but kind of just
Well, the
hits
hermetics.
you in. Yeah, just in general, just like
Oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, what I would say is every single person has this in them. Every single person is deeply, deeply spiritual. Most of us, because we believe that what I see is more real than what's inside of me, we just follow somebody else's blueprint. And it's not even their blueprint. It's their trauma blueprint that we keep following. And we just been on this rhythmic cycle of trauma forever. Right. So what I would say is when I was about 8 years old, growing up, I was like the weirdest kid, was drawing like crazy stuff, hieroglyphs, like just random things. And about 8 years old, I went over to my grandmother's house. So I was there for like the summer times. I'd always stay with her for the summer, because parents worked and whatnot. A bunch of people died in that summertime. And she ended up, we were going to these funerals. And one of the things that came to me is she would tell me about, I was like, where do they go when they die? And she's like, oh, they go to purgatory. And I'm like, oh, well, why is there purgatory? So this time you have to wait until Jesus comes back. And I was like, So when we die, there's no time though. Like it doesn't make any sense to me. So I said that at 8. She's like, well, there is time. There's a thing called purgatory. I'm like, well, it can't be a thing called purgatory because when you die, how's there a concept of time? And so we got in this like argument about it. And then she told me, and I said, I can't believe that there's like a clock and you're in this spot waiting years and years and years. And we're all just waiting around for this thing to happen. And so an interesting thing about the story is that when I was born, my aunt, her daughter passed away like 3 days after I was born. And so that whole thing created like this thing of me as like this omen for her. So I was always looked at as like this kind of person, and she loved me immensely. So it had nothing to do with that, but there was also this energy around it. And so that next year, I was not invited to stay there for the summertime. So I went to my grandmother's house in California.
So
And I
different
had
grandma.
another grandma, my mother's
Yeah.
mother, and I had one of my family members stayed there with me, and his father had just taken his life, and he was a little bit older than me, and he was expressing his trauma in a space of sexually abusing me. And I'm 9, and he's a little bit older. And so, I mean, significantly older to the point to where I couldn't really do anything to defend myself. And at that moment in time was all of this beautiful stuff that was rolling through me that I felt like had I been able to stay in that state, the stuff that I talk about now probably would have come when I was 20 instead of when I was 40. But I needed to go through a bunch of stuff in order to figure myself out so I could really know what this is. It's not like it was whatever I was getting at the time was like a silver spoon. It was like, oh, this is beautiful thing that I'm knowing. And I'm
Yeah.
getting this light that's brought in. And it had to be tarnished so I could appreciate how to clean the spoon and what that looked like. And so for
Oh,
years
okay.
that went on, didn't really talk about it, shut my voice down. And then it ended up expanding itself into more trauma, trying to take my life and other stuff. Ended up being federally incarcerated for a couple of years, about 3 years, for something I didn't even do, but I had to go there to learn how to like be a true observer. Like that's the interesting thing. You go to prison and you're like, you could go in there and like be really active, or you could just observe the world falling apart around you. So it's like, oh wow, that's interesting. And I'm losing my house, that I'm losing my cars, that I've got a 1-year-old son that, I have no idea what the hell's going on with them, but I'm hearing all these stories. And it put me in a space when I was in there where I recognized this must be how God feels, watching us losing our fucking minds and doing nothing about it, but just watching. And so then the freedom I found in that of being the observer and loving what I'm seeing without intervening was like life changing for me. Then you go back into the world and I went backward. Like I like regressed because now you got to like survive again. And so I was
Yeah.
actually less free out there than I was in there. I was less free in the world than I was inside a prison.
Because of physical limitations, or because I mean,
Mind state.
what's that?
Mind state.
Yeah, I'm assuming if you're in prison, you're just sitting there. I mean, whether you're meditating or just observing, right? You're more in an internal space.
Yeah.
So there's less when you don't have to worry about bills and taxes
Mhm.
and relationships and all this stuff. You can just focus more inward.
It was that. It was that, and it was also just truly learning how to love the situation you're in moment by moment, without the distractions and the need for survival, and the need to measure myself off of somebody else's reflection. You all have the same clothes, you eat the same food, you wear the same shoes, you do the same thing. There's something to be said about socialism. I wouldn't go down that path, but I can see why it creates peace in some regard, right? As long as you don't have an oligarchy that's running it and using those individual resources. Democratization can be really interesting if you do it the right way. But move all that aside. I was less free there. I was more free there than I was when I got out in the world, because now I'm like, well, I got to get these clothes and these shoes in order for me to get a girl. I got to look like this. I got to get haircuts. I got to make money.
It
And
takes more effort.
yeah, and then you get out and you go to the halfway house, and not to make this whole prison story, but you get out, you go to the halfway house, and every job you can get is on a bus line. So then you can only get certain jobs that would be on a bus line that wouldn't actually be a career that you would do in life. So I had to figure that thing out. And that, you go back to, I put up this post today about backtest the universe. And you backtest the universe from now, and you're like, oh, I see why I did that to myself at that point. But at the time, I'm like, these jobs suck. So I go from making like really good money to making nothing. And I'm working at a car dealership. And then I started to learn that every place has extreme abundance inside of it. And so I started to walk with this abundant mind state, but I didn't realize that that was going to be the thing that brought me forward. And at about 39 years old, something woke up. I was like, my life does not feel right. I was married again at the time. I had my son. I was doing all of the 3-dimensional things that you're supposed to do, coaching the team, doing the job, 9 to 5, the whole deal. And I'm like, this doesn't feel good anymore. And I just went and found a job in New York, and I just took off and went to New York from Dallas, Texas. And I would come back and forth. I was like spending all my money to come back and forth and seeing my son every weekend, and every 2 times a week, that kind of, because I had split custody. And up there I ended up meeting my now wife. I was married at the time, and she was this like magical being. And she's like, why aren't you meditating? Why aren't you doing these things? I'm like, what do you mean meditate? I don't know how to meditate. Like, so I'd sit there in turmoil with my thoughts just ripping through my head about I can't be still. I need to go do something. I need to be active. I need to go, I need to be in the world doing the thing. And eventually I was practicing this and it wasn't doing a damn thing. And one of her ex-boyfriends sent her a thing because he was passing away on a Sadhguru video. I watched the video and I'm like, that's it. There's something in that. So I jumped in that rabbit hole. And that was 6 years ago. That led me into Dr. Joe Dispenza. I jumped in that rabbit hole. And that was actually something that really foundationalized me, because I'm like, oh, the quantum thing, I can get that. That's scientific. Like the way my mind was working. Yeah.
Where's the book? Oh, this book. You hear Greg Braden? This was the first book I read that was quantum and spiritual.
Yeah.
By Greg Braden. Yeah.
Great book.
Yeah.
Great
but
book.
it's funny because, like, for guys, most of my clients are men, and getting them to understand the spiritual stuff is very hard, but you can tie it to something more logical like science and bridge those gaps. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now I can, right?
Yeah.
Because guys want to be like, if a guy can't use it as a tool and actually produce something with it, it's not really valuable to him.
Yeah. We're not, our thing is, how do you actually receive the thing you can't see? So it's like, I can't receive that, but I can receive the science thing, and the science bridges over here. And I kept seeing these things. And, one of the things about not using my voice when I was younger, from the sexual abuse thing, is I ended up getting a thyroid condition in that window of time before I actually found my way. From like 36 years old, I ended up getting a thyroid condition, had my thyroid irradiated, and had this whole like massive like transformation where I went from being like this extremely skinny guy to this like 260-pound guy to now I'm, like 205 pounds. But in that vacillation of things happening, it was like I went to being all the versions of myself. It was like seeing something morph. Like if you were to watch it in fast motion, wild.
Yeah. It's polarity. You got to see both sides, and then you got to figure out kind of where you land for your own situation.
Yeah. And I recognize that what Joe taught me, and I ended up like doing this stuff where I just started like chasing Joe. Went to all his retreats, went to like 9 of them, got close to him. Yeah, get on stage, I start telling my story, the whole deal. And all this like wild abundance things happened. And I was like addicted to Dr. Joe. I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. Like, I could just stay in this realm, and he's my guru, and I'm going to be that. I can recite the stuff really well. Went to California, tried to form a little mini cult, nice. Dr. Joe cult. It was great. Yeah, it was awesome. Don't recommend it, but it was great.
There's a few of those. I've seen them.
Yeah, it was like 5 people. We were awesome together. That for me, that recognition was that there's more to this. And even though Joe is like an awesome human being, what he teaches is super magical. People heal themselves. They walk out of that thing like, I healed myself. My thyroid condition is completely gone, even though I have no thyroid. And I know how to keep that state, but I thought I had to be him, follow him to do that.
Yeah.
And that took me on this deep rabbit hole of exploration after that. And then things would just show up, like the Kabbalah just showed up. The Emerald Tablets just showed up. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll read that next. I'll read that next. I just kept reading stuff and consuming more and more and more information. I mean, I just bought like 6 books the other day, and I'm just, it just keeps going. And then I started to piece together how it all works. Right. Because I'm like, it can't just be this thing, and it can't just be this thing.
So and then I started pieces.
Yeah. Then I started finding flaws in the, I mean, not that there were flaws. I found that there were incomplete aspects of everything. There were incomplete aspects of, the Hermetics. It's not incomplete. It's just not told in a way that's full.
Every truth is a half truth.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, shit, there's like a whole feminine version of this thing that's missing that we don't talk about. And then how does that even map to this other stuff? And so that opened a lot of doors for me around exploration. And I wrote a book about it. And, now I just talk about it all the time. Like, here we are.
That's very interesting because, so like you said, maybe like 10 minutes back with childhood stuff, right? Everybody's born with these gifts. It's just a matter if we develop it or not. And there's a few things that I've seen happen, which for me, I feel like I shut mine off because if it's happening, if you don't have the right people to help you develop it, then it gets overwhelming. We end up shutting it off, or there's trauma that happens. So I see sort of two ways people end up splitting from birth. It's either they have the right people in the family around them to help them develop it, and it becomes a normal part of life. Like it seems like you and I, something happens and we shut that off because it's just too much, or we don't have, like, something happens, right? And then there's always this kind of going back to it, and then like finding it. But like how you said about, that was part of what you had to do to really appreciate it and to really learn it. And but yeah, it's so interesting because there's no like clear right or wrong, like what's the best way.
Mm-mm.
I've done podcasts with there's a girl, Misha, actually. She's in outside of London, and she was raised when she started having, she's had this like crazy astral travel experience. Then I believe her grandpa was a Mason. Then her family had some understanding of this stuff, so they were able to cultivate that for her. And then one of the cool things she said, she was like, "Oh yeah, I was having these like psychedelic like experiences when I was like a teenager without even having to touch any of that
Yeah.
stuff."
Yeah.
So it's cool. It's like all these tools come back to, it's like, what's it come back to? It comes back to you. It comes
Hmm.
back to building the person, empowering the person. Like what you said with the Joe Dispenza stuff, right? He's a very good teacher, but ultimately, if like you want to progress to the next level, it's how do I build myself up so there's no gurus and I'm able to continuously grow and progress, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of just saying like, hey, I need to go to this event, all these events around the world
Yeah.
to keep feeding off that. Eventually, it's like, okay, no, what do I need to do with this?
Yeah. You become an addict to the illusion. And with him, I mean, my thing with every person that I walk through my courses or I teach or any of that is like, you are your own Messiah, and everybody, you are your own Messiah. Save yourself, and you're everybody's disciple. You're here to serve everybody else, and you're here to fucking save yourself. If you do
Yeah,
those things, you're great, right?
yeah,
But if you're chasing the guru and you're asking for somebody else to save you, okay, it doesn't work. It just never will work.
yeah, you're missing it.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
It's putting the power out there in the person. Even because Joe Dispenza stuff's great. I mean, they're doing what, 4 or 5 hour meditations at a time, something crazy
Oh
like
yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then hermetics, right? Mentalism. It's the first key because if we don't have control of our mind, we don't have control of anything else. But yeah, I think he's a good piece in an overall bigger picture, obviously. But yeah, like what we said too. It's like serve the higher realms and then roll over the lower realms and serve those people so you can bring those people up with you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's really magical. It's really, I mean, this whole journey has been, it's you understand the paradox, you understand the midline, you understand the having and not having, the giving and receiving. You get the whole process, and you recognize that you are never fully there. And that's the most beautiful part of the journey, is that you're always on it, even through death. If we believe that death could not exist, I think there's a way to not have it exist, but that's a whole other thing.
Hey, Jesus did it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In the
He said,
grand scheme of this thing, it's
yeah, he said, "Hey, screw it, kill me, as I'll come back." Right.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
dude beat death. That's crazy. Right. But that's a funny thing because I have a lot of or religious people. They probably message you all the time. Oh, this is whatever opinions they have, and I said, well, look at who do you follow? And they follow Jesus. Well, what did Jesus do? He studied in the mystery schools. He studied in Tibet, Egypt. He learned he learned these modalities, and then when he was 30 years old, then he started his ministry. Right? So he was a prime example of what a human can do. He was a human that reached his full potential while he was here with these tools, right? And people that don't like that are intimidated. I think it's an intimidation of their own power, what's in them, and intimidated by a responsibility to obtain that power. They'll say, "Oh no, well, he's my guru. I gotta, you know, I can study him. I go to church on Sunday. Oh, I can never be like him." I said, in your own Bible, it says, "What is it? Ye can be like me and more."
And more.
Right. So
100%. Yeah.
I set the path. Just walk the path and keep going, and eventually you can progress past that.
Yeah.
All right. So
Yeah, it's funny. I had a conversation with he was this guy, he was just like heckling me in my comments. And so I was like, well, let's get on live and talk about it. And so we had a little live and we talked about it, and he was like, well, John 3:16 says this. And I'm like, okay, but dude, it says in freaking I think it's Luke 8:10, it says that the thing you just said, you'll do more than me. Or maybe it's John. It's another one. But it says you'll
yeah,
do more than me. And it was like, okay, so which one's true? So, like you can't throw out this part of the water, right? And keep just the baby inside of it and say, like, this is all that there is. Like there's other stuff that floats around it. And we as individuals want to take this one comment and make it our entire doctrine when it's about seeing things quantumly through every perspective. And for him, it was just like, well, he's the only way. And I'm like, cool for you. That's awesome. That's your perspective. I think that's what gets you there. Great, right? If you
Yeah.
got to see aliens, awesome. If you need to go have Kundalini meditations and that's what gets you there, amazing. There's not one way. Like it's
Hmm.
even the original translation of Genesis, it's
Yeah.
in a beginning. We all have a way. So it's like but the we moved it to in the beginning, like it's the only one.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta turn. It was funny because we were talking about before, like the first time you read the Kabbalion, right? Your understanding, and then every time you read it, it deepens. And it's like maybe I should just tell the religious people, like, hey, go back and read your Bible five five times, maybe once a year, and like live life in between, so you can have new experiences with it. Because it's almost like there's a filter, and it's like eventually they're gonna see in the Bible where it says, "Ye are gods," like you guys are godlike, and it also says when Jesus said, don't start a religion after me.
Yeah.
And then people completely missed that, and they start worshiping him as like guru, right? I mean, it's like you said, almost like the Joe Dispenza thing. If you say, oh, if you put Joe Dispenza on this big pillar, Joe Dispenza is just a vessel to share what he knows, right? Jesus was the same thing. He was coming here sharing Christ consciousness and sharing love, like a message of love. He wasn't saying like worship me like that. He was saying, follow these teachings, well, not even his teachings, follow God's teachings, follow my
No.
Father's teachings. Here you go. Right.
No.
So yeah, it's really funny how that's just somehow poof, it's just missed. I don't know why.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wild, dude. It's wild. Um, and I have this notion about, why, I'll probably get cast stones at some point over this one, but why Jesus was really crucified. You know, had nothing to do with him saying that he was the son of God, right? It had nothing to do with him saying that I am God. I'm sure people say this now, like, I'm God. People said this for years, like people have these things where they recognize that they are embodying something, you hear it all the time. And I'm sure back then there were other people that said this that probably didn't get thrown up on a stake. Need to
They
find
just didn't
proof of
have
this.
they just didn't have social medias.
Yeah.
No,
But why?
my understanding of that, he was he had his mission, he fulfilled his mission, but he was sharing very powerful teachings, right? He was sharing
That's it.
secrets and mysteries that was reserved by people who are in power, and he was empowering
That's it.
everybody else, right?
Yeah.
So they're saying, hey, we don't want everybody else to have the power we have. So,
Yeah. Let's kill him for that.
yeah,
That's
let's
what he
kill them then.
died for.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's what he died for. He didn't die for the son of God thing. He died because he was teaching people mystic tradition and occultic practices so that they could be the
God.
magicians of their life. Period.
Yeah, yeah. Let's
Yeah.
let's see what the comments are after that.
Yeah. 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 And let me say this, and this one's going to even be probably more comments, is that playbook of how to do this mysticism thing. There's several of them that you can get from ancient mystery schools, but one that I find works extremely well is if you understand Jewish mysticism, Sefer Yetzirah, the Kabbalah, that framework of how to actually, it's just a playbook of exactly what to do. Okay, like the 231 gate practice, the rule of 32, like all of these things that if you do those things, like the wildest shit happens in your life. Okay, you can literally build realities off of that specific playbook. So if that was passed down through oral tradition, which they say, okay, that the Sefer Yetzirah was the channeling of Abraham that was passed through Isaac along the Judaic line. And over again, this was just kind of like a thing that was hidden. And the Essenes and other different sects of Judaism had the ability to practice off of that. That went in and found other areas of how they work together. But even like the Hermetic principles live inside of Kabbalah, right? All this stuff is like inside of these other areas.
Yeah, but what's your understanding of something that's hermetic? Like, what would constitute something to be hermetic?
When it follows the seven laws, when it has those seven principles that are baked inside of it.
Right. But hermetics itself is to understand the heart and mind of God, right? Without
Yes,
the dogma and pollution. So, which means it has to work for you, it has to work for me, it has to work for 100% of everybody that's applying it, right?
100%.
Because if
Yeah,
it's, yeah, yeah. And if
yeah,
it's I don't think I've ever said that on the podcast before, but if it's, if it's of God, it has to work for everybody, right? Everybody has to have that potential to move and progress forward, right? So that's a good way for people who are looking at something spiritual, that's a good way to discern, is it pure? Is it of God? Okay. Are these teachings able to work for everybody? You don't have to be Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or whatever, right? It just works regardless. It supersedes. It's the principles that they all twist and take and change. It's like it supersedes all that. So you
Yeah,
just go right to
yeah,
the source. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And what I always say is, it's just the direct line of the playbook. And that's why they say keep the Sabbath holy, because it's the seven that are encoded in those 7 days of creation. When you keep that holy, whole, worthy, then at which point you have that direct line, that direct access. And it takes you from the construct of I to we, and you understand why we are all running this way. And all of this is literally embedded, like it's like just stuck inside of the thing behind you. Okay.
Yeah.
It's in there.
Fabulous tree of
So if
life.
I take this, because everything from oral tradition has a DNA imprint inside of it. One of the only religion, I think the only religion that's considered a race, is this Judaic race. The whole concept around the framework of the chosen one is the chosen ones that actually have this playbook that's printed inside of them that has nothing to do with, I mean, maybe some of the Torah, but I don't, it's nothing to do with that's all code. But this Jewish mysticism that's bridged off of all these other areas, that when you put it into practice, you can create realities and you can do exactly the stuff that Jesus did.
Yeah, that's 231 gates. Yeah, well, another thing with Kabbalah, we have in the mystery school, we have a program, a 10-month program called Universal Hermetic Kabbalah. And so it's an ascension path. So we start in Malkuth, that's, kingdom on earth, and we ascend to here, and up to the supernals up there. But this here itself, this is your spiritual DNA, right? If you twist this, it's a double helix, which means this is a path of creation. I mean, this is going to be backwards, but the path of the flaming sword coming down. So you can take the infinite to the finite in physicality. And in that process, in the ascension process, you're learning things firsthand. So when you ascend to the next level, to these different triads, your life becomes kind of a hologram. You can learn, okay, where's this? Okay, maybe I need to, clear up the emotion, maybe add more creativity. Maybe I need to work on splendor of the mind, communication, truth, purpose, and Tiferet, right? And I think that's the coolest thing about taking the unseen and having direct experience with it, is because it's different of like just reading a book, because the book, it gets information, gets filtered through our kind of junked up mind, and like we might do something we might not. But when you're working with energy and you're working with these principles and these hidden structures, I guess you're actually living it, right? You're waking this up, and then you're clearing out all those sephiras that are just, for everybody that doesn't know, all these circles here are called sephiras. They're like filters, right? So if energy is coming in and it's blocked here or blocked here, then whatever comes down here is going to be very distorted. It's not going to be actually what you want to manifest. So, it's the cleaning up of the psyche, cleaning up of the self, so we can actually flow that energy properly and manifest.
Yeah. And what's even more interesting is the way it flows. It flows in the path of 777 when it comes down. So, it's boom, 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 like a lightning bolt, but it's like this entire 777 framework.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Boom, 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 boom. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you go from, wisdom.
My favorite thing to tell
Yeah.
couples here, because relationships, everybody's worried about relationships right now, right? But I said, if you're stuck here and that sucks, too much emotion, right? What happens in relationships? Somebody comes in really emotional and there's no truth there, right? So you got to balance out you got to clear the excessive emotion, merge it with truth, and then you can communicate, right? And when you can communicate, you can commune. And when you commune, the masculine and feminine energy come together.
Right.
You can actually create something,
Right. Right.
So when people hear, and women love that teaching, because they're like, okay, they say, oh, well, somebody told me I was too emotional. I was like, well, this could be why it's actually affecting you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's cool once you have this understanding of Kabbalah, you can always reference back to it and say, okay, where am I? It's a blueprint, and say, okay, where am I off? What needs cleaned up? So then things go back to flowing properly.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if you layer that thing over the body, then you can literally map it over yourself and be like, oh, my left shoulder hurts. I'm off here. My hip hurts. Yeah. It's like, it's a freaking playbook. It's
it's awesome. It's cool, because when I have clients come in, they're like, oh, my hip hurts. I'm like, how have you been communicating recently? Or like, you've been like lying or like telling the truth? Because it's POD, right? It's on the right hip.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're like, And then it's funny, because when you start this stuff, you're like, oh, no, that's not connected. It's like, you kind of just write it off as like, oh, no. right? And I'm like, okay, well, and then they tell me what's happening in their life. I'm like, okay, well, do this one thing. And they do it, and that shifts the energy and it clears it up. And they're like,
Hmm.
oh, well, now I got to raise at work or this happened. It's all these indirect things that really are connected. They start, flowing again. They're like, oh, well, now my hip doesn't hurt. And I'm like, yeah, you
Yeah.
moved the energy. Yeah, yeah. What a
You were
what a
holding the trauma in your hip. Yes.
what a surprise. I was going to ask you too. When you had the stuff happen when you were a child, um, and you said you're blocked like in your throat and stuff. Were you very, was your communication very stuck then, or was there a point where
Hmm.
that, yeah?
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
you
I know
kind
when
of,
I got caught. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, can you kind of expand on that? Because that's another thing with people who are, anybody can relate to that, right? Or being kind of stuck or like the heart center shut off. And as we do that work, one of the biggest things that happens is like the heart's able to open up, we're able to flow that energy, and through that we're able to express more. And a lot of big shifts happen through the throat and the heart chakras.
100%. Yeah. So the way that I view it is that there's all the chakras of the body, right? If you even map those over that thing right behind you, okay, the tree life, you've got,
Yeah,
at
your
the
heart.
top of this crown, okay.
Well, doth would be at the throat.
Well, I'm going to get there though.
Yeah.
So you've got the crown up here, okay, and you've got your root that sits down below. You can't see it as I'm sitting here. These are connected. Okay, so
No.
they all work in this cycle. It's a big circle that kind of runs around it. That's how I view it. Because if my intuition, like basically if my crown is off, I'm not receiving my intuition and I'm not receiving the divine. Generally I feel unsafe. If I feel unsafe, this is shut off. And so these things talk to each other. When I have this like sacral trauma that happened, the sexual trauma that happened to me, my intuition got shut off. So I was like already having this like intuition of me understanding this purgatory in no time at 8 years old and all this other interesting things. But that got shut off when this thing got traumatized, right? When my body got traumatized. And it's like, okay, well, then I didn't start speaking. Then I start speaking, then what do? I shut off my emotions. All right. So I shut off my solar plexus because I'm not actually I'm not talking anymore. I'm not saying anything. I feel disempowered. And every single one of these chakras protects the heart. So when one is out of balance, they do all that they can to protect the heart from actually feeling when things are out of balance. And so it just guards it and you get this black heart. That's what I call it. Okay. So the heart becomes really blackened because it's constantly the light that's trying to get to it is shadowed by all these other areas. And that heart is the electromagnetic field. It's the thing that EMF, when it puts it off, that connects with the quantum and the pineal gland and everything starts to do its thing. It creates this really healing effect. And when all of this when I just had this really compressed because I was, even when I tried to talk about it, I couldn't say anything because my emotions was like, okay, I was so empathetic about what this guy went through that was doing it to me that I'm like, okay, I'm so confused by what this means because there was a traumatic pattern and lineage that passed through. And the last thing I wanted for him to was be hurt, but I'm being hurt. But then I stopped that from being hurt. Then people, when I say it, don't even believe it. So then, the truth that I was even speaking wasn't even heard. Right. And so then what happens is your heart just says, okay, I'm going to shut it down. And for, my lack of feeling and worthiness because I wasn't in my heart, I mean, that went on for 20 years. It tried to take my life 4 times in my 20s. I mean, I just all the things that you could possibly do to get out of this thing, to unlive because, without your heart, life feels like it's not worth living.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. People think that when they shut down, that's what leads to all that stuff when we're not flowing. And when we shut ourselves down, then that leads to depression. And because the depression and anxiety, all that stuff is stuck energy that we don't know what to do with, or something happens to us. And then people say, oh, well, I guess this is life. This is what it is. They have a very distorted perspective. And then life kind of crumbles, right? I always say you gotta, you got to look at somebody's soul, not their actions, because I think everybody is good. Everybody intends to do really good, but things happen, right? We're living in a world of light and dark, and it's unfortunate, but yeah, it's a very common thing where primarily people will shut their heart down, or soul. I would say the biggest three are like you said, the throat chakra, the heart, and the solar plexus. That's where people carry a lot of tension.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah. It was, it's a thing. And most of those things create what we see. Right. Because if everything that we're, I always say our eyes, we project everything into reality, even the 231 gate, when you roll around that, if people don't know what it is, it actually looks like an eyeball. Like it's freaking nuts because
That's
it
gonna
actually
hurt their minds.
projects, it projects and
That's
collapses the reality.
yeah.
but you have to use all of your body in order to actually feel it into reality. Otherwise, you just can't go through the process and say things over and over again. Even the Bible says, don't create with vain repetition. Don't just say it just to be saying it. Because so many people, you get a mantra, you get a affirmation, you get a statement, and you just say it over and over again. You think something's going to change, but you don't feel it in your body. And these chakras of the body are extremely intentful for you to have that aspect of creation. So when they become clear, the heart becomes the creation center. It stamps the reality into life.
That's a good thing you said, the feeling, because a lot of people that don't feel when we have these things, or just, going through life, we accumulate junk and negative energy that eventually needs cleared. But if that adds up and kind of builds up in our system, we shut ourselves off, then we don't feel, and everything we're doing in life is for the feeling. And like you said, if you're doing any practices or rituals, and you're just saying it and just going through the motions, if you're not feeling it, then you're not actually creating it.
Yeah.
Right. So and another thing with that's another thing with working with guys shut down a lot easier. So women feel almost too much and guys feel almost nothing. So getting a guy to open his heart, this was my path as well. This was hard for me because I was always like very hardworking and just in the world. And like you were saying, like we want to have all the success. Yeah, I'd have my heart just blasted open to actually feel stuff. And I was like, okay, now I know. Because when you feel it, the feeling is the inner knowing,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not like I keep saying about the books. It's like reading a book is one thing and it's very mental and it gets kind of passed off to our subconscious. But once you feel something, you actually know, right? When you play a sport, or you're playing basketball, you can feel kind of nuance and the difference. And you're like, okay, now I know how to make that shot. Now I know how to do this. So now
Mm-hmm.
when you feel, you actually have that power. There's power connected to that. Um, Another thing with the chakras, because chakras are very, everybody knows like the aura and chakras are like the basics they understand. And your chakras are that medium between your physical body and your spirit, right? So it connects to the soul, to the physical body, so you're able to actually flow that energy. And like you said, energy is always coming in through the crown. Most people are blocking it with all their thoughts, their traumas, their opinions, their monkey mind. So the energy can barely even get in, and then it has to all pass down through all the other chakras as well to go back up.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why this stuff is really important. It's nothing to kind of write off like, oh, it says woo woo, whatever. It's like, well, it's like having your arm cut off. It's like, well, how are you going to be able to function? Well, you might be able to sort of, but if you want to be optimal, you have to be 100%. You have to heal those pieces and put it back together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, what are you operating on in life? 40, 50, maybe 60%. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
If that, I mean,
yeah.
what I love about science, what you were saying, is that every time you get a scientist or somebody that's like up for the Nobel Prize, they like get to that point. You get Einstein status, they just end up right back in spirituality. They're like, oh well, crap, there's this deeper thing that isn't what I've been looking for.
Brings
And
them closer to God.
yeah, he's like, oh well, there's something else, and it's not what I've been studying. And there's even like the math of God. Like I found this one Robert Grant deal.
Hmm.
And he and I talked about it too, but found this one Robert Grant deal. I mean, your probability is like less than finding a needle in a haystack the size of the universe. Like your probability of like actually being full functioning human by accident is like it's impossible
To be born or to be like fully functioning?
to actually. So let me pull it up. I actually have the thing here, so you can. I will say it. So the math of God. All right, hold on a second.
Yeah, I mean, if you look
Basically,
back, I mean, yeah, if we're looking at just somebody who reaches their full potential, I mean, how many people did that? There've been plenty of,
hmm,
well, there's lots of masters of a light, but not if you're looking at the billions and billions of people that have been born. It's a very small percentage of people
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
actually been through that.
Reach the full potential. All right,
Yeah,
so here it is. All right, it said the odds that we would randomly create functional code to create a new gene that would create a new protein at 155 sequences long that would be considered short. Okay, so like fully functioning DNA code, like if we could do that, all right, the probability that we can do what I just said would be 110 to the 77th power. And to give this weight, there are 10 to the 66 atoms, okay, in the Milky Way. So this would be like searching for one perfect atom in the equal space to 1 trillion galaxies the size of the Milky Way. It would take you 4 billion years of carbon dated history of this earth, and that's not even enough time to compute to find that single perfect code that would make up 155 sequences in the human body. Now, put this into perspective, human beings have over 80,000, 120,000 sequences. So the math of us even in like being anything, like by
Yeah,
just accident, circumstance, like it's just not a thing.
it's fine. Yeah, that
Yeah.
stuff's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he does. Have you been to one of his Egypt trips?
No. He just had one
Yeah,
recently. A buddy of mine went, and yeah, probably will be going to one either in May or his November one, maybe. But we'll see how it goes.
yeah, it'd be cool to
Yeah,
check out.
yeah,
What
he's
we
good.
Yeah, that was one thing. You said something about like gratitude when in prison, but I was thinking I had that thought the other day, and this is kind of funny to think about. But if somebody's struggling with gratitude, it's like, well, there could be nothing, right? Before we were, we could just have just black space. We can be floating in space. We can just be energy. We can't have these relationships. We can't have all this cool stuff. So I'm like, you have to just compare everything to absolutely nothing than what you have now. Even if you have very little, compare that to absolute darkness and nothing. Then see how much more grateful you become in 10 seconds or less,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No,
So you have to
100%.
be, yeah, you have to be
Beautiful.
like, wow, this stuff's actually made. The fact that I can, have these AirPods in and drink this water and talk to you, it's like it's
Hmm.
pretty trippy. We're so used to it, we just like kind of are numb to it,
Hmm.
but it's pretty trippy of like where this all came from nothing, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
a very, yeah, it's insane. It's a very magical thing. That was, I think I made a video on that, but it's just funny to think of.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
like because
That's
it could
super
be
cool.
nothing,
It
So
could be nothing.
if you have very little, it's just like make the best of that little, and then little by little you'll be able to receive more, and you'll grow and expand. And maybe find a spiritual path, and
Hmm.
then they'll figure out what the 231 gates are.
Which is a wild. It's a wild thing, and
That's
it's
some
so interesting.
advanced
This,
Kabbalah
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. And there's so many derivatives of things, and there's not one path. And so when people get on this thing, they're like, well, which one should I do? The one that feels good to you. Like, if you want to go, you know, to do the UPE thing, go for it. Like it's great. If you want to do the angel healing thing, go for it. Every person should be entitled to their thing, but it all unifies into the same principles. And this is back to this hermetics, right? When you can take those hermetics and you really start to create a foundational understanding of it, you see how it all works together. You see that no matter what it is, whether you're like, let me go track the reptilians down and see why they're fucking with me, you know, or, and then you break that down to the geometry and the code and what numbers, what that actually means. You're like, okay, well, that's that. Okay, cool. Let me like sit with that for a little bit. Or whether it's like, hey, it's Archangel Michael and I need to go down that path. Cool. I can go down that path also. But it just grounds it in very specific principles of isness and balance that allow you to create reality. And then when you can expand that through masculine and feminine frameworks of how they actually work together, like I ended up taking the actual like the shape, the philosopher's stone shape, and then started playing with it because I felt like it was like out of balance. I like made this thing,
The Merkaba
which
or what?
no, it's not the Merkaba. So it was the what I kept challenging myself with is that the philosopher's stone has the way because I did it on this arm. So I have the philosopher's stone over here, right?
It's hard to see.
I don't know if you can
It's under
see
your
it.
arm.
It's like right
Oh
here.
yeah, yeah. See, I got that
Yeah.
on my the back of my leg, my calf.
Yeah. So I put it there and then
Why
I
wouldn't
kept
we have that?
yeah, yeah. So I was like, well, there's and then I put 777 in the middle of it, right? So don't know why, but I just do these things. But I kept playing around with it and I'm like, okay, how in the hell do the different principles of the hermetics flow within this? And so the linear paths are, mentalist, like the triangles, the mentalism, the rhythm, and why am I losing things right now? Not
Just look
rhythm,
back at
mentalism, energy, and correspondence. So mentalism, energy, and correspondence,
vibration.
and that isness. There's no
Yeah,
balance needed for it. It just is, right? And that's what starts to ground your reality. Then you have balancing principles that sit underneath it that are the square. And there are four of them. So it's no wonder it's a square. And inside of that square, you've got your polarity, your rhythm, your karma, and your gender. But when I kept playing around with it, it kept showing it was like out of balance for me for some reason. And then in the circle that's in the middle of it, that circle in the middle is you, your infinite you, your God. And then the circle outside of it is the all one mind. And the all one mind connects everything. And then these are the ways that you get into it so you can find balance that you find yourself, or vice versa. Right.
that's
And
a
so
good way
it's,
to look at it. I mean, yeah, there's multiple. You can look at it as, I mean, it's the basis. One basis of sacred geometry. It's the language of the universe. The elements, right? Because we need to have those elements, and to properly manifest, we have to have earth, water, and fire properly in balance to actually have things flow through. But yeah, the principles lay out a path to become godlike, right? As somebody was asking me on my meditation group 2 days ago, they said, "Well, what's everybody says vibration and vibes. I have no idea what that means. Can you explain that to me?" I was like, "What?" You can look at, if you just single out vibration, you can look at that as ascension, right? As we raise and expand our consciousness and ascend energetically, or refining our vibration, our reality shifts, and we become, the more conscious we are, the more close to God we are. And he was like, "Oh, okay, that's super easy." I'm like, "Yeah, that stuff, people complicate this stuff a little too much."
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the
100%.
a lot of the spiritual stuff. I find a lot of people give the what but not the how. That's why I like the hermetics and being a part of a spiritual path, is because it gives you the science behind it, the repeatable process, right? So this stuff isn't just kind of like, "Oh, okay, this is cool, like, I learned about this crazy thing, but how does that apply to my life, or how do I actually get the energy from that, or, to create with that?"
Yeah. Yeah.
you know
1000%. Yeah. I'll show you this thing real quick. So I created this thing, which you'll find, I believe, interesting. Because the other thing I used to struggle with was like, how does this map into astrology? And how does this map toward, everybody
Which
said,
one?
well, this is a base 10 system, not a base 12 system. And why are you using that? All this other stuff. And how do you get the seven to so I was like, okay, well, let me just start playing around with this. I'll pull this thing up for you real quick, because this is interesting. I think you'll dig it. I'm going to share my screen. I'm sure people don't normally do this, but I'm doing it anyway.
I didn't even know you could share your screen on Riverside.
Yeah, here we go. All right.
Oh, awesome. There we go.
All right. So what I ended up doing is I took the same Philosopher's Stone, but then I said, okay, let me put it in a balanced state between the masculine triangle and the feminine triangle. So you
Hmm.
have feminine mentalism, masculine mentalism, right? You got masculine correspondence, feminine correspondence. You got feminine vibration, masculine vibration. When you hold that in balance, you end up getting this balanced infrastructure of this Philosopher's Stone that sits in the middle, right? That creates the I state that moves into the we state. And then you have polarity and karma, okay, that are balanced inside of this ecosystem, and then rhythm and gender that also do the same thing.
Uh-huh.
And when you can tap into your karma, or your karmic side of it ends up leading into more of like a feminine mentalism state, so that when you actually sit in the seat of cause, you get into a state of receivership. When you understand how to unify polarity, you see the unification of the way the all mind thinks from a
What
fatherly
was
perspective.
what would you say about cause?
So
About
cause, so when you sit at the seat of cause, right, you actually are receiving, right? Because you're receiving divine information in order to then stand in this state of feminine mentalism, because feminine mentalism is much different than masculine mentalism. Okay. Because what I ended up doing is I took that and then I mapped this over into the tree of life, where I was like, okay, is it not possible that I can then take each one of these different frameworks and then put feminine mentalism as this aspect of like the earth olive line that sits right here is this bridge between, even if you look at the Hebrew word, it's like this bridge between heaven and earth. So then I
Yeah, that
take
would
that.
be right.
Yeah. 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 This is like this would be Christ. This would be Mary Magdalene. This would be Mother Mary. This would be the Father, right? This would be the Father, this is the Father.
Where would you put
This
Christ at?
right here, masculine correspondence. So there's the correspondence, the Son,
Well, yeah, he
Father.
sits at
Yeah.
Tiferet.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm
I've
sorry.
got them like,
I'm just
yeah,
trying
yeah.
to follow along, because this is your
My
creation.
version.
So I'm just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
trying
Yeah,
to
yeah,
trying to see your
yeah. Okay, okay, yeah.
stuff behind it.
So like sits right in here, right? And then you got karma and polarity that sit up at the top of this that then bridge this together. And then you've got, because it like perfectly fits. Like these weird triangles all just like fit in together that are the same triangles that you pull out of this thing.
Well, you know what, the Merkaba is the ascension vehicle, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that mix of, I mean, that's the last hermetic principle, but the gender, everything has masculine and feminine energy to create, right? That's why we have to merge those energies.
Right. But
This is
then what
cool.
was even weirder is that this, okay, how you get this to a base 12 system, because then inside of this you have 12 pieces that come around with this. So then you can even honor still the base 12 system, which then maps itself over into the zodiac. And then I did a whole
Right.
thing here because then it helps you understand how all of that works together.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a whole thing. And I was like, oh, okay, now I understand how all these things are like supposed to go together. And so then I have to
Oh
go
yeah,
through,
this could be a massive rabbit hole.
oh, dude, it's wild. And then you even
Yeah.
understand how 369 works. Right? Because then what you end up doing is you take the middle point of every astrological sign, you add up what's sitting around it, you go down to the digital root of each one of them. And then in essence, over this window of time, you have this whole 369 thing happening. Okay, so you end up over the winter solstice, right? You
Yeah.
have 6 gates, 4 gates of 6 where you can actually open up into your purpose, because the number 6 in my dimensional framework, and then what I understand, what it downloaded to me, was that it's your purpose. Like it's God's purpose for each individual person.
Well, 6 on the tree of life corresponds with Tiferet, which is your higher purpose. So that would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it aligns, right? Then what's even more interesting is that right here you have two. The only time 231 shows up in this is right here around that winter. That center point is right at
Hmm.
Christmas time, right? That winter solstice thing. So
Yeah.
you can open up this 231 gate inside of the actual astrology chart, tied to this like 369 framework, which is the math of God or the keys of the universe. And then you understand how to like move through these different ascension windows based on the frequency of each individual trinity of when these three come together at the middle point. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, to me, it does.
Yeah, I mean, some people, some people be like, dude, it was
When do you, what, how do you usually receive your clarity? Is it through meditation or through some type of expression or art, or like when do
so
your kind of downloads come in?
I don't meditate anymore. Like I used to all the time, and I actually didn't get it then. I would get it like when I'm like just having a conversation. So we'd have having a
Hmm.
conversation with somebody, and it'd be like, oh, boom, and this thing starts coming in, and I start processing.
That makes sense. That's more
I
feminine.
Yeah, I stopped meditating when I started doing. There were two things that happened. One, I started doing neurofeedback. So I started doing like this brain cap thing, like this, where I would put these EEGs on put this cap on,
Yeah.
and it allows me to understand how to feel beta, theta, alpha, gamma, delta. So I can drop myself in a conversation with you into alpha, theta, and then stuff starts to come in. So then I'm like, okay, now I'm getting that. I'm clearing the mind, and it comes through.
Yeah. I would say when I teach meditation, I say when I teach the brain waves, right? Alpha, theta, beta, whatever. And I'm like, your mind's like a traffic jam, right? So we got to clear the traffic so we're able to actually receive stuff. So we need to drop down to, I always recommend we should be just walking around in alpha, but when we drop into the deep, like the theta stages, I'm like, that's when things can come in. That's why meditation is great. It's like, because we're the whole, going back to masculine and feminine, right? Masculine, feminine energy is we have to create the space to actually fill the energy with, right? So if the space is clear with drunk or trauma or whatever it is, nothing's going to be able to come in.
Yeah.
That's why meditation, healing, and all the things are very important, because that's clearing the feminine side of us or aspects so we're able to actually receive stuff. You know?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It's wild, dude. It's wild.
What other
Yeah. So I
rabbit
mean,
holes can we get into?
so yeah. So now it's like I just say, well, for me, the whole life is a meditation, and then you just stay in that state. You feel that state, so you carry it with you because it's I'd rather not that I'd rather. It's just I used to practice a lot and fuck up in the game instead of
Hmm.
executing the game, taking that practice into the game. So how fast can I take it into the game and establish a rhythm off of it to where it's like, okay, what I do at, Michael Jordan can make a million shots. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Like I was like one of the best I did triple jump in college, like fucking 60-foot triple jumps in college. I was killing it, right? In practice. I got into the track meet. I'm like sucking because I get mental because I can't
Yeah.
do it under pressure. I can't do it. I couldn't do it in the thing. So I was like, it's no different than our life. Like we can do this all day long with no pressure. But then you actually get into the game, like you suffer, and you might do it once, and then it feels like, okay, you're like a magical human being. You got to do it all the time. Like it's a rhythm that you have to create for yourself. Law of rhythm. There you go.
Yeah. Rather, you gotta position yourself on the positive swing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you're saying you get a little bit tripped up if you're only meditating.
Not if you're only meditating. It's just if I become dependent on the drug of meditation in order to
Yeah.
find my center of myself, then what do I have to be? I have to be in a constant state of meditation. So I'm a constant state of
Well.
meditation. To me, like this is what I
Yeah.
found
Yeah.
for right. And so you're in a constant state of meditation and you come out of it. It's like accelerating out of the blocks, right? In track, or like you've got this momentum and then you get into the world and then you just peter down because now everything outside of you become a victim of for a lot of people.
Yeah, I see what I understand what you're saying. Yeah, it's really like when I'm leading meditation groups, it's saying like, hey, when you receive a certain higher energy, the goal is to sustain that higher energy, right? To now live on that plane. And that is a challenge because like we said, like you're in a world with good and bad energy. And if we're not aware of this stuff, we're going to, you know, go into a coffee shop or work or whatever it is, and we're always mixing with everybody else's junk, right? That's why it's important to understand this stuff and how to clear our energy. Um, but yeah, I would say meditation for me is it's like a phone to like contact, kind of get what I need and go apply that thing, right? I think it's very similar to what you're saying, but after if you've practiced enough and you've built that muscle, then you can drop in easier, right? So I'm assuming you're still meditating, but maybe you're not dropping in for like 30 minutes, an hour at a time because maybe you're just quicker.
I mean, it's just a constant meditation. It's not a linear path anymore for me.
Right.
And that's what I work to teach people is that you just feel, what do you feel inside of that meditation? Now feel that in the real world and keep feeling it. And as long as you can keep feeling it, you're meditating, but
Yeah,
you're
no,
not
that's
out of the
what's
world.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's one of the hardest things. It's like I always say the word psychological suicide because when you're doing the spiritual stuff, it's like, okay, take what you think is normal right here and just do this. Right. So when people have struggle of like letting go or kind of when life might be falling apart and they're trying to get to the next level, I'm like, yeah, the illusion's breaking down and you're seeing true reality, and it's actually a blessing. You should be grateful for that. You should be. Who was I talking to the other day? They said they were yeah, basically they said they appreciate everything because they knew it was setting them up for what they needed. Awesome. Now,
100%.
how does your program work if somebody is working with you?
Yeah, so there's three different levels of it. The first level is somebody can come in and just like try one of the modules that I do. And then generally I give them a test. It's all automated. And then they start monitoring their changes, right? So it's more of like a extended version of it. The second one is we do this every quarter as we do a cohort of a couple hundred people. They drop in and we go through this thing called the Science of You, which takes the Hermetic principles, it takes the Kabbalah, it takes dimensional analysis, and like the things we teach, like how to apply technology into this, how to really understand what the Hermetics are, how to read your body, how to bend time, stuff like that, right? And then so we teach that for 5 weeks. And then that ladders up to a Resilient You class where there's about 20 or 30 individuals that jump into that. And so we just do that cycle over and over and over again. And then I do one-on-one coaching with people, but that's a whole other tier of things that I work.
Right.
Yeah.
Then what would you say like where does it ultimately lead people or like what kind of results do they typically experience?
Yeah. So for a lot of, if you can do it right and walk in that rhythm, financial abundance opens up. A lot of people heal themselves. So things that they were dealing with from a healing perspective, they just become their own self healer. Most individuals, when they get the courage, they start walking in their purpose, and they generally will pick another career path or do something that they know is very for them. But yeah, finances change pretty quickly for people. One client recently, and she had just literally reset her life, got out of a divorce, and went from literally living paycheck to paycheck to all of a sudden she was doing about $40,000 a month overnight, which is pretty cool. I've coached one-on-one people like billionaires and people like that, but those people are
Yeah.
just like trying to get back into their heart because they've done the other thing.
Well, it's funny because a lot of people they look at self-improvement because I understand they want the stuff, right? They're like, okay, I just want the money, the relationship, health, whatever it is. And then this stuff goes way beyond that. It's like it's not about the stuff. The stuff is the side effect of it. That's just the fun stuff. You get to play with that, right? It's who you really become and how aligned you are and the mission you get to serve and the people you get to connect with. Really those are like the true fruits of, progressing spiritually like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and, and
yeah.
and at the end of it, no matter what lane they take, it's even if it's the splinter in the mind or it's like a full like let's open you up 100%,
Yeah.
you're gonna find the way. Like this is helping us remember that we all are the one collectively and individually, but it only happens collectively, and that we all have the ability to create the most abundant lives, and that we all are remembering how to ascend together. And this is happening at a very specific point in time. And there's not one leader; we're all leaders. So it's just if the people that I help get there, great, but we'll all
Yeah,
wake
it's
up
really
together. Yeah.
yeah, it's really well said, but it's not an easy path. I mean, it takes, somebody I've talked about this on another podcast, but we're talking about like what type of people do we serve? I'm like, wow, I mean, that's broad, but it's ultimately like the people who get their best results are the ambitious ones. It doesn't matter if they have a lot or a little. It's the person who wants to really know themselves and has that desire and will commit to that. It's like that person's gonna because the path is never ending or their path is never going to be ending. They're always going to be growing and progressing. So that
Hmm.
takes a lot of resilience.
It really
So
does.
I really appreciate people who step up take that on, because those are the ones that then become leaders and then are able to serve the world and, accelerate everybody else, even the people that don't want to do it. It's like, give credit. Actually, this is I got the man in the arena quote right here, is the
Mm.
credit's due to the guy in the arena getting his face marred up, because, not the, do you know that quote?
I don't know that quote. Yeah, send it to me. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's cool.
but it's saying, the credit's due to the guy that's going in the arena fighting, getting his ass kicked, not the person on the side that's too scared to do anything, that has the opinions and the judgments. Like, that's a really cool thing about like the people we work with. It's like those are those people. Those are the people that are they're willing to throw themselves in and commit and, get a little banged up, but then they get the results. So it's a
Yeah,
beautiful thing.
yeah. We all make an offering to each other, and when we receive that offering, we heal each other, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah. That's why this
yeah.
game, this game's, we have to do it together. It's like,
Mhm.
the people that suffer the most are the people that isolate themselves and try to do it by themselves. It's unfortunate, but as you grow and progress, it's like, ultimately the goal is like unity, right? Going all back to the same place. So that's why, like, the relationships improve and everything improves, right? It's all relationships. That's why there's so much struggle and miscommunication and misinformation about relationships today,
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
that's what does a relationship create? A relationship creates God. That's the entity it creates.
yeah. We're two or more gathered there.
Yeah, exactly. That weave it in energy. Oh,
Yeah,
cool. I don't want to keep you too long though, because I got to bounce. But yeah, man, I appreciate we covered tons of cool stuff. Went through some rabbit holes. Went through some really key pieces. Where people are struggling and solutions to get through that. So, do you want to leave them? Like, what's the best way to connect with you? Through Instagram,
yeah,
your
yeah.
website?
I mean, IG is easy. Abundance 10,000. Come there on IG, which is cool.
See the cool videos.
Animation stuff, yeah, yeah. And I have a similar YouTube channel that's about to really start kicking off. We're gonna do something really interesting with a couple of NFL athletes, actually one predominantly. That'll be like kind of a question answer thing that's going to be coming out there. So subscribe to that. If there's some cool things on there right now, but it's kind of light, like an interview with Terrence Howard. If you want to see that rabbit hole where that went, and then
You can
and
probably just talk
then
forever.
yeah. It was fun. And then we've got the website scienceofabundance.ai. There's a bunch of tools on there, purpose statement generator, codes of abundance tool, like that type of stuff. So you can check it out. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, man.
Awesome.
This is great.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it,
Thank
brother.
you.
Much love to you.